Hi, everyone. This is Jason Velasco, and welcome to this edition of Out of Curiosity. And today we'll be having a wonderful conversation with Brad Mixner with Mixner Consulting. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of different topics around data privacy, Asian e-discovery, and data privacy, ILTA, and a whole bunch of other things. So looking forward to it. Brad, you claim to be a innovative technologist. That's what your LinkedIn profile says. So that's a pretty broad claim. What does that mean? And tell me about you.
Well, I put that on there to be purposely broad. I think my background, as you know, is pretty uh, multi-dimensional. Starting off in 1997 doing paper litigation support, and actually starting in the industry before there was such thing as e-discovery. Today, in my role both here and in Singapore, I like applying different technologies, some of which comes from outside the industry, to solve problems and to take perhaps on approaches that are not typical, because there are no one case is alike. So that's why I call myself innovative and technologist. I think all of us are, especially those of us like you and I who've been around for decades instead of years.
Yeah, I actually
Background.
had, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I had a conversation just the other day with Kat Casey on the podcast, and by the way, she sends her regards to you as well. But we were talking about innovation and how it's really innovation doesn't have to be a really broad category where it's game changing. We're not all Steve Jobs. Innovation could be I'm making one process a little bit more efficient.
Well, exactly, and I think our industry has grown to only focus on massive things, going back, almost 20 years now to Enron, the big whale of all whales in our industry. And I think that got us thinking that everything needed to be massive. Massive projects, massive licensing agreements, multi-million dollar cases, and now multi-billion dollar mergers in the industry. And with that, I think a lot of things got pushed aside, whether it be technology for small to medium-sized firms and small to medium-sized projects, to, as you just said, steps in a workflow that maybe need tweaked. Or one of my recent focuses is on client experience,
Hmm.
training, overall. Do we really need some technology that's overly tech, where sometimes you just need something to get the job done? I think there's too much technology at times.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been working with a couple SMB, small medium sized business clients in the discovery space, and a lot of times it seems to be, they just need to be able to know how to fish a little, and especially around things like Microsoft 365 and Google's Workspace and some of just the basic tools out there. I mean, this functionality they have in there, why not be able to leverage it with a little bit of training and expertise?
Well, that's just it. And I think there's a huge intimidation factor,
Hmm.
when it comes to you know, everyday attorneys who don't take any technology classes in law firms and don't necessarily want to admit that they don't know anything about technology. I don't think many of us want to admit a weakness. And when it comes to looking at some of the big popular platforms in the market, which have incredible amounts of functionality, when all many people need to do are basic searching and reviewing and doing tagging. And for the true hardcore users, those platforms are amazing. But sometimes they just need a simple interface that isn't intimidating, to do their specific tasks.
Mhm.
Or the project is such that they just need something that just does the blocking and tackling.
Yeah, keep it simple, right? That's
Yeah,
the we'll keep it the kiss with one S.
yeah.
So I mean, you've had an interesting journey. You've been doing your own consulting work, and I know that you've been doing a ton of work in Singapore. Could you maybe take us on that journey and how did you discover that market and some of the activities you've been doing there?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Yeah, Singapore started as an offshoot of after I went solo in 2008. My last gig before then was doing an on-site project in Hungary, FCPA matter. And we all know what happened in 2008, where the economy exploded, or I should say imploded. And I decided to take my knowledge of international e-discovery, which I learned because I was a guy who wasn't afraid to travel. So I took a lot of projects at the time in Asia and Europe, learned a lot of the ins and outs. And through LinkedIn, one of my partners in a company we founded said, hey, if you have any paper e-discovery matters in Singapore and Asia, let us know. So we kept in touch, and we just, in 2011, I believe it was, we started Litigation Edge.
Okay.
Which is a boutique e-discovery company based in Singapore, and which has become, in the past several years, as the litigation, arbitration, and more importantly, legal technology hub in Asia. And
Okay.
it's been quite the journey in 10 years. And it's growing in many ways, and its services are changing as it is here in the States.
So it brings up a really quite interesting question for me in terms of I mean, the work that I've done in Asia has usually been centered around Hong Kong, of course, and now that's completely changing. So the Singaporean market, I mean, it's my understanding it's pretty limited in terms of like the number of law firms that are there. I mean, it's a it's a city state. I mean, what's the volumes? I mean, is it what's the types of projects that you're starting to see in those areas?
Well, Singapore is limited in the number of UK and American law firms. There's only so many that are allowed to have an actual license to practice there. But Singapore being one of the financial hubs of the world, there's a lot of transactional work. And there's a lot of partnerships that are going on in Singapore with the international law firms. As of late, some of it due to government investment, it's grown as a regional hub for litigation and most importantly, arbitration, which had been, as you said, in Hong Kong, in somewhat Shanghai, but with recent political movements in China, law firms and corporations are moving away, and Singapore's where they're stopping because of the safety, because of the stability. It's become the go-to place in Asia. Volumes are such that it's not comparable in any stretch of imagination to anything we see here in the States or UK. But it's the perfect stopping point to branch out for data collection because Singaporean passports are like Swiss passports. They're good almost anywhere without visa issues, which makes it very good for that. As I call it, domestic e-discovery and data collection is very small.
Gotcha. So it sounds like the legal side of things is actually pretty robust in terms of the dealing with the fact pattern and the legal aspect of things.
Absolutely.
However, we're not going to have the terabytes of data of processed like in whatever the review platform or with the processing platform. So you're not going to have those large review teams and things like that.
Correct. It mirrors UK legal system. And they've embraced e-discovery as a concept, but they are very big on keeping costs as low as possible. They are very big on proportionality. Let's keep things sane when it comes to exchanging evidence. They aren't big on let's dump every bit of data or ask for every bit of data that might be involved in the case. They want the judges insist on let's keeping this sane. So their actual legal system is very similar to what we know here in the States and the UK.
Gotcha.
Volumes are very, very manageable. Quite often we find many lawyers simply working with PDFs because the volumes are that similar.
So you opened up a lot of different questions around there. So let me first start off with, let's define what proportionality is, because sometimes that's a legal term of art that some people may not be familiar with that. What does proportionality mean in a legal context in terms of requesting documents and the discovery or disclosure process?
My personal explanation is, let's keep it reasonable to the size of the case, and keeping it, not having terabytes of data for something that is not a large matter. If it's two custodians, you don't need to have 3 terabytes of data. That's how I explain it in layman's terms. You may have a different explanation.
I mean, my explanation typically is going to be in the realms of very, very similar to yours, right? Which is, proportionality to me always means in terms of, is the cost of the discovery process proportional to the potential impact of the particular matter at hand, right? So you don't want to spend $3 million on discovery for $1 million case.
Correct.
And yes, you can ask for all that, and we've seen some of that with the FRCP. So FCP, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, in terms of adding proportionality to that from a context perspective. But I think what was the word that Judge Shinlin had used in the past, 15 years ago with with the UBS case, was weapons of mass discovery, right? We don't want that to happen. It seems like the Singaporeans have taken that to heart.
Taking it to heart, and I think taking it almost a step further, where I think litigators here in the States are very cautious about being sanctioned for not doing their clients the best service. And they tend to overproduce and things of that nature, and just driving the volumes up, where it's the exact opposite there. Let's keep it to the nitty-gritty of what's actually important.
So how does Singapore compare to other APAC jurisdictions? And let's remove Australia from that for a moment. Let's talk about, whether it's Thailand, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, those type of places.
They diametrically opposed, where Singapore is very comparable to what we know and practice here in the States and the UK. I'll lump us together. Singapore being a former part of the Queen's realm, is a very similar legal system, very similar practices with eDiscovery and eDisclosure. Whereas the rest of Asia, barring Hong Kong, their legal systems are not anywhere close. They don't practice discovery and disclosure, and it's common law versus civil law, I believe is the difference. And with that, that's a similar reason why you don't find vendors in those countries when there's data collections are needed, especially for technology matters. Thailand happens to make a lot of hard drives in the world. Thus, there's a lot of need for data collections in Thailand. Unfortunately, there's no vendors there to do the work.
So how are they addressing that? That's a really interesting question, because I mean, I've always been, as I've had clients over the years on the legal service provider side, I've advised them on, trying to break into the APAC market and things like that. And I've always said, don't spend a lot of money propping up review platform instances in those areas, because that's going to be a waste of money. Really focus on building a collections team or partnering with people in a particular region. Is that still seem to be hold true in those marketplaces?
Partnering, definitely. I think the regional accounting firms have built specialists who also, the forensic accounting, they also will do forensic discovery. So that's frankly what we've done in our practice in Singapore. For that same matter, it's silly for us to spend the money on getting somebody purposely trained and buying the software and things of that nature, because it just doesn't, we don't have the need that much. From a US perspective, from service providers, the growth that we've seen is people who are hosting on AWS or Azure, which I think is accepted a lot more than it was even a couple of years ago. And the ease of setting up and spinning it down, makes it a viable business option. Where it gets kind of shaky is there's some people who don't like using a third party for doing the collection work. Some end clients and law firms don't like having the relationship with the end client or with the people doing the work. And I don't know, that's unavoidable. Because let's face it, service providers who do a lot of the data collection here in the States don't have a presence in Asia, and more importantly, don't have the business there to justify opening up an office in place.
Yeah, it's something that I've always been fascinated by the marketplace, and you've always been a great surrogate for me in terms of being able to stay on top of that. So there's some particularities to that marketplace as well. Number one would be the language. The CJ Chinese, Japanese, Korean, CJK language packs that to have to done, and multilingual review requirements. What are you currently seeing now as people that are using that, or have they standardized on English? What's the technology they're using for searching? I'm just very curious about what's currently going on around the latest.
I think one of the challenges that we've seen, different countries have different English aptitudes. For instance, Singapore, English is pretty much the first language. So that's what's taught in school. Their laws are in English, so it's not an issue. And many of which speak 2 or 3 languages fluently. So that makes Singapore a great place for doing Chinese review, Korean review, and even Japanese review. But if you go to Korea or Japan, English is not necessarily that prevalent. So it makes doing review in those localities a challenge. One of the other challenges we're seeing amongst the entire region is having the software attuned to regional workflows. For instance, in Singapore, they don't do productions. It's a whole different workflow.
What do you mean they don't do productions? How do they look at the data? How do they produce it in trial?
They do a version. I mean, they turn over data, but it's not the same style. Where they're doing PDFs and turning over bundles to the courts and the opposing parties, but it's not exactly the same way that we do it here in the States. And many of the platforms don't allow an automated method of doing that. So we often have to build workflow that simple exports out of most of the platforms on the market today, and then doing our own processing afterwards. And then another problem is purely with the interfaces. Most companies don't want or perhaps even need to have an interface that's in one of the CJK languages. And why would you? I mean, is it a solid business decision to convert the interfaces to one of the CJK languages? People have done that in the past.
Right.
But that can be when you're doing a lot of review with, say, Chinese translators, can be a learning curve.
So do you see a lot of multilingual review providers in this space? How are people looking at that data when they have to go dig through it?
I think I don't see as many providers. I'm not saying they're not there. I think those documents are being segregated, and perhaps having multilingual attorneys handle those matters. I think there's a lot of, frankly, associates that need to work. I think there's a lot of reviewing being done back here in the States, or there are some companies in Asia that do the work, or even in India who do the work. So, there are resources, but I don't think they're necessarily marketing themselves as review companies.
Gotcha. Which leads me to another question. You had mentioned a moment ago that some of the reviews being done in the States. Let's talk about Singaporean data privacy. I mean, if you've got particular cases in there, and there's a request for information, or going back and forth from a cross-border perspective, What's going on there? I mean, because I mean, I know that Singapore has some pretty stringent data privacy rules.
Well, fortunately, if you're talking most things, language barrier isn't an issue in Singapore. So there, for this topic, nothing needs to leave because they have all the languages. They have enough people locally to handle that. Singapore does have some awesome data privacy regulations, but they are practical enough that they do allow, where needed, the ability to move data. So, you know, when there's hostings, that thing of that nature. It's modeled after Europe and the EU with the GDPR, but it's very much focused on protecting the interests, but also the realities of the world. And it's going to keep getting stronger, mostly because of the cyber security issues that we're all having around the world.
So do you have any advice for folks that are, you know, okay, I've got cross-border challenges. What do you typically advise clients? I mean, I've seen attorneys range from just send me the information, I'll take the risk to send it to my law firm because it's data private, it's privilege there. But I've seen all kinds of things, man.
Well, I think the biggest challenge, especially if you want to talk Asia Pacific, is take a deep breath when you're dealing with China. Doing any work in China is challenging. Sending it, even considering sending it out of the country, their data restrictions crossing the borders there are very, very, very tight, including it's not fines, it's jail time for whoever's doing it. So that's where I always say find local counsel. We've been involved in those kind of matters where we always suggest we give the data to local counsel, and we also leave our hard drives in China just to avoid any problems at the airport. And another thing I suggest is set expectations with end clients that it's going to be a lot more expensive. Prices here in the States have driven downwards exponentially because of volumes and technology, but in Asia, people are going to have to travel. It's a simple fact. Technicians are going to be based in Hong Kong or Singapore, maybe Korea or Japan. So they're going to have to travel into China, to Thailand, to Taipei. And with that, there's additional costs. The technicians are going to be higher paid. And that's just part of the cost of doing business.
Well, and how has COVID for the last year impacted that? I mean, because if you don't have bodies to go out and collect data, I mean, what are people doing?
That's a good question, because all of the countries there have been locked down. And in fact, Singapore is just now coming out of their second lockdown, where they can't even travel to Hong Kong right now. Fortunately, the legal world has still operated there. In fact, we generated our own software to help handle virtual hearings and evidence management and evidence, well, we call it evidence management, but it's also allowing for evidence to be displayed at virtual hearings because there's nothing readily available for the courts. So whereas witnesses used to fly in, well, there's witnesses all over the world who were traditionally would have flown in for arbitration and litigation hearings, couldn't. So they have a new normal there as well. Unfortunately, they're also catching up with their vaccinations. So they recently, as of today, announced that they're going to be 12 and up.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so that's really great for them. Other countries in the region aren't doing as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, it sounds like it's innovation.
Right.
It sounds like you actually, there's a particular need that was usually covered by people. COVID, I think I saw a mention from, I think it was Craig Ball yesterday. The pandemic was probably the greatest driver of change in the legal technology space in the last 30 years. Besides maybe Enron. So tell us a little bit about more of this software package that you developed. Is this something you're planning on launching commercially or using it for a particular client?
No, it is. We have slowly released it. I would say we're in advanced beta release, and we've announced it publicly. It's called InSync Evidence Management System, where it combines the ability to package evidence, as they call it, e-bundles, allowing legal teams to do annotations, notes, and then when it goes to hearings, it allows all the parties to virtually work and display all that evidence and sync it across everybody's monitors.
Mm-hmm.
So it took software that we already had with doing e-bundles, which is a variation of their productions. And we've taken a step further. And it worked out so well last year that we've invested the time and energy to develop it a step further. So it's covering more of the EDRM.
Gotcha. And do you see a place for that in the U.S. market? How does that translate?
I think there may be a place for it as a very light review tool, but it's maybe a segment of a normal review tool that we have here. It doesn't do redactions. It's overly simplistic for what we see here, and I'd honestly have to sit down and think about whether it'd be worth Americanizing it, because it's very geared towards a Singapore workflow and how they do and how they label each step of the process. And quite frankly, we haven't even considered it.
Gotcha.
So,
one last thing on the Singaporean market.
Sure.
You are very connected to the Singaporean courts, which are usually the deciders of who's going to do business or who's handling the eDiscovery matter. Is that correct, or is that it's not the lawyers or the corporate providers? Define. Help me understand how that breaks out.
One of my co-founders, Serena Lim, has had a great relationship with the court system and things like their Academy of Law. And they don't necessarily appoint anybody, but they have driven innovation through government investment. In fact, there's something called Accelerate for Law that just ended, where the government invested in several platforms, including one of our own, that they gave a supplement of 80% back to anybody who got subscriptions for eDiscovery. So that, in one way, did give approval to certain platforms and technology. And their goal is to have all of their local law firms and attorneys embrace technology and learn so they can compete on international domains.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating market, and you've always been a great resource for me as I've tried to learn more about, or when we have particular opportunities for that particular marketplace. Thank you for sharing your insight there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a fascinating case study. It's been great helping them learn more, and that's what I've done. I've helped educate, and I've gone down and spoken there a lot, and worked with some of their from the court system onto my coworkers and law firms there, and it's great being able to give them lessons learned over our time to help them build a market that's substantial.
Right. No, completely. So let's pivot a little bit. I know that you've been very heavily involved in the eDiscovery and litigation technology space for a very long time. I know you've been working a lot with ILTA. And could you tell us a little bit about what ILTA is and what you're doing with them now?
The International Legal Technology Association. I decided in the infamous 2020 that I wanted to give back more than I had been to the industry, and volunteered with ILTA's ILTACon committee, which is the conference that's coming up at the end of August. And I'm helping coordinate two sessions, one of which is going to be about the mergers in the space. For those listening who don't know, there's been a lot of very, very large transactions where companies are getting acquired or merging. And we are compiling some very heavy hitters from C-suite holders all the way through some financiers. And somebody I know is going to help me moderate that panel.
Well, hopefully he's very attractive and very compelling and a good discussion.
Well, I've heard so. And I certainly appreciate you helping me out there. And the other panel is going to be on the application of artificial intelligence in the legal office, which also will be fascinating. I'm working on getting people from corporations to talk about how they've applied artificial intelligence. And I think it's going to be a different spin from having this is how it can be used, spinning that to this is how we are using artificial intelligence.
Right.
So artificial intelligence has been talked about so much in recent years, but I think having this different spin on it will help people understand and take away several points of, wow, that's a great idea. So that's our goal. And I think everybody wants to understand all these billion-dollar valuations that are happening in the past several years.
Yeah, you and me both. So how did you come up with these topics, or how do these topics come about?
We have our group, ILTA has, I believe it's 10 different groups who get together on our weekly phone calls, which now it's weekly Zooms, and we really just spitball and come up with, I think it's 12 different sessions. And we as a group basically vote on them and say, oh, well, we've had that in so many sessions in the past several years, or this is topical. And we go through several different weeks of going through the iterations. And then it's a lottery system on who gets which session. And I took my first pick and picked the mergers session. And that's when I asked you if you'd apply. And we'll be finalizing that session hopefully in the next week or two. We definitely are going to have some heavy hitters there who have applied. And I'm really, really excited for that one, as I am for some of the people we have and applied for the AI session. And our prospective moderator there couldn't be a more vibrant person. So your listeners have already listened to her before. So
that's awesome. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And just for those, ILTA is going to be between August 22nd and August 26th in beautiful Las Vegas.
Yes.
Hybrid and live, right?
Yes. There will be, for those who have travel restrictions, it will be hybrid and will be online. But more importantly, you can go to Vegas. They are, at first it was half capacity, and I think we've gone up to 75% and maybe more by the time August comes around.
Yeah, I think Vegas is opening up fast from my understanding. So,
yeah.
And I guess when we're out there, you're going to have to give me your crap strategy again, because I've forgotten everything that you showed me. So
about that. Yes, I have been very fortunate when it comes to the craps table.
That's awesome. That's definitely a skill game, at least in betting processes. So, Brad, how can people reach out to you, and how can they get a hold of you?
The best and easiest thing is to go to mixnerconsulting.com, or my email is brad@mixnerconsulting.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody, even if it's a quick question about international eDiscovery, or Asia or Europe. I've done a lot of work in both. And as Jason knows, I'm always happy to answer that quick question, or I'm always available for engagements, short, medium, or long.
Nice. And what kind of engagements do you typically look for? Actually, that's a good question. Maybe we should answer at the top.
I should probably say that what I've done in the past several years, I've done year-long engagements where it's been very client-facing and helping, in this case, it was software developers with training and working with clients and client relations. Because I think that's something that's been a challenge for our industry, is both in training and in how they're working with clients. And it's certainly also the most complaints I've heard over 20, 30 years is, well, they sell it to me and they forget who I am. Or I can't say that I got enough training, or things of that nature. And it's something that I'm passionate about. I like working with people. I like training people, and I also like helping developers and service providers work better with their clients, because in the end, it helps them make more revenue in the long run.
Yeah, that's the amen to that. So, and again, you're also on LinkedIn.
I'm very active on LinkedIn.
All right, so people can find you on LinkedIn as well as your email, and we'll definitely put your links on the comments below. So, thank you, Brad. I really appreciate your time. It's always great talking to you, and I'm glad everyone got to participate in in one of our conversations. So they're always very enjoyable for me. So, thank you everyone for joining us for this edition of Out of Curiosity. It's been a joy. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and if you have any comments, ideas, or things that you're curious about, feel free to connect, let me know, and I'm happy to answer those questions or take your ideas. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day.